All right, so take a listen to this loop I put together. Cool, so we're going to talk about some of the stuff going on in there. There's a lot of tricks people use when they're making these kinds of sounds. Anything from multiband distortion to parallel compression. But those are all kind of fattening up tricks. It's important to start with a sound that you're happy with. I'm going to make some of those in this video, but I'm going to try to avoid walking through actual patches because I think that's not helpful, and there's already a million videos out there like that, and you'd have to have the exact synth. The trick I'm going to show you today can apply to whatever gear, plugins, or DAW you're using. It's about phase syncing and detuning. First, let me do a quick lesson about phase. So when you hit a note, the plugin's going to start outputting audio from kind of varying points in the actual waveform. For some synths, it's going to start over. Some synths will pick up where they left off last, sort of. We can actually test it though. I have a number of synths lined up here. We're just going to freeze, flatten, and look at the audio. Massive is constantly sort of cycling in the background, so when you hit a note, it's kind of arbitrary what phase you're going to get. Analog, as you can see, completes the wave each time. It picks up wherever it left off last, and over here it finishes. Operator is going to start at the very top of its wave each time. So will Razor. You can actually set that in the plugin itself though. Let me show you how this makes a difference on sound. Let me pull up a new set with a massive patch that sounds like this. So a little flat and boring, but we're going to work on it. The phase settings in Massive are right here under the Oscillator tab. You're probably all familiar with the Restart via Gate checkbox. It's just going to restart the phase from 0 each time you hit a note. If you wanted to start somewhere specific, you can pick that with the phase slider. So let's turn that on and go ahead and just detune it a little bit. So that really changes the sound. It brings out this characteristic phase sync kind of effect. Let me open up Zebra and show you something. It's a pretty boring wobble. It's just two oscillators run through a filter. But if we go ahead and turn on phase syncing, which is right here, we're going to turn these on quad and detune them a little bit, and now it's going to sound like this. So already we get some of that kind of clean, high-end movement we're looking for. Zebra is a great choice for this kind of sound because of the spectral effects it provides. By playing around with some of them, I turned that patch into this. Make sure you check out phase crossover, phase root, and exophase. So we're going to look at a different synth. FM8 also has these settings. It's over here called key sync. So this is going to reset the phase to 0 each time a key is pressed. Also, if we pick an oscillator, set the ratio to 0, they call this a static wave shaper. And by cycling the offset from between 0 and negative 100, you're actually cycling through the phase of whichever waveform we've picked. That's 0% through 100% of the waveform. So this is cool, but I don't actually use FM8. So what if we want to recreate these phase-like effects in synths that don't explicitly have a phase sync button? I'm going to show you a trick where you can set that up using Ableton's instrument racks. Let me pull up a new set. You should be able to do this in whatever DAW you use as well. I'm going to use Razor, which is one of my favorite synths, and especially great for these kinds of sounds because it, right out of the box, can do things like this. But we're not going to use that. I'm actually going to make a new patch here. I'm going to speed it up because it's not really important that you copy it down. It's not the patch, it's the technique I'm going to show you that gives it a cool sound. Alright, so the patch I made sounds like this. Oh my gosh. So what we're going to do now is put this plugin in an instrument rack. Click on it, press Ctrl-G or Command-G to do this really quickly. Make sure you show this list that's called the chain. We're going to wire up some parameters that we like to the macro knobs in Ableton. You could do 1 or 2 or even 8. It depends how much control you want over the sound. I'm usually fine doing 1 or 2. You can even map them to your controller if you like. The parameters I'm going to choose are the formant, oscillator 1, the cutoff of this low pass, the stereo width, and the cutoff of this comb filter. The comb phase is also a really good option for this kind of thing. So what we're going to do is map each parameter over here to a macro knob. It's important that you set it up like this because we need to preserve the mappings when we duplicate the synth. So hit Control D to duplicate the synth. This is going to be a bit of a CPU crunch because Razer runs through Reactor. Now it's possible that your station, like my old laptop, could not handle this. So if you can't render this audio in real time, you can still draw your automation, freeze the audio, and then listen to it. This is what I had to do for a very long time. It still works. And now we have 5 copies of Razer. We're going to come up here to the fine-tune settings on each one and detune them just slightly. About 0.01, 0.02 is good. I usually don't go farther than 0.08. It's not super important that you detune in both positive and negative directions, just a habit. So what we have now is basically a rack of detuned and phase-synced Razers. That sounds like this. Sweet. So there are definitely some tonal characteristics that were not present when we just had one copy of the synth. Let me switch sets and show you how I use this. So I've dragged that rack over into a new project now. I went ahead and wrote some notes in automation, and it sounds like this. There's a couple of things that stand out to me when we're playing with this patch. First of all, the comb knob completely changes the sound. Normally automating the cutoff of a comb is a really cool trick, but with the phase syncing, I really don't like the sound of it. There's too much beating going on. So I'm going to try to stick to short wobbles and kind of drawing in with the brush for this one so that different notes have different values of the comb, but there's no kind of sweeping between them. Also, the comb filter doesn't really change the volume very much. The low pass does that for us. So I've used it to generate some percussive or plucky style sounds. So opposite the comb for the low pass, to me it only really sounds good when it's moving. Just kind of sticking the filter on some value doesn't sound like great to me. To keep this bass energetic and bouncy, we really need to have a tight handle on our dynamics. For an example, here just a guideline I kind of follow. To fit the bass around the snare so that the snare kind of pops for that glitch feel, I'll draw these kind of short spikes for whenever, here are the snare notes. I'll draw these short spikes in the low pass whenever the snare hits, so the bass kind of just gets way out of the way really fast. This works in this case because the low pass is sort of a dynamic control. If we were using like a pair of notch filters, I wouldn't do this. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building the sound. Try to put together some kind of dynamic control. Other options that work well are some of the dissonance modes in Razer or some of the oscillator settings. And the formant and the stereo knobs are just kind of there to color the sound, make it move a little bit more. With all that in mind, here's the automation that I drew. Here's the automation. It can be a little hard to decipher, but you can see how the comb up here just kind of sits on a few values. There's a couple wobbles, but I keep them short. I just use this knob to color different notes with different timbres. The low pass is always just moving. There's these spikes, there's these quick envelopes. And then the stereo and the formant are just kind of used to color the loops a little bit, some impact. The filter does stay open for that one, just because I like the sound a lot. We're actually going to go back to the first set I showed you now. Let me load that up. Okay, so we're over here again. So that kind of fidgety neuro wobble is actually a rack of 7 Razers. This is a different patch. You can see there's no formant. It's a regular low pass, no resonance. and a comb notch instead of a comb peak. Normally, I really don't like the sound of a comb notch. It's a lot harder to get a good sound out of, so it takes some playing with. Let's go ahead and listen to just one of these by themselves, just with the regular patch. It sounds cool, very Koan soundish, but with the phase syncing on. That has a lot more energy and impact, and it's different than just turning it up. It sounds different. So the rest of these sounds over in this set, these sounds, those are actually bits and pieces of the first massive patch I showed you earlier in the video. It was flattened, resampled, kind of just pitched around, and did some cool things with it. That's really all I had to say about phase syncing. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can apply this to whatever your favorite synth is. But yeah, that's it. Bye.